Hidden within each of us is a secret desire to destroy. Each of us would like to be able to become the other being, to know the master makeup artist's magic. How to Make a Monster. Broadway stellar performer Robert H. Harris brings to this theater the most terrifying of men, a man whose mind is distorted by hatred.
I'll use the very monsters they mock to bring them to an end. This maniacal strength will linger in your arms and hands. And with it, you'll destroy your real enemies. Exactly as I instruct you.
Pending autopsy findings, I would say that he was attacked from behind by someone with fiendish strength.
So what do we have to do? Look for a monster?
We're not talking about actors. We mean a real monster.
Behind the scenes in Hollywood's wonderland of make-believe, where pretty girls parade their pulchritude, terror stalks with the stealthy steps of death. And death following death permeates the very air you breathe with horror. The monster maker of make-believe land sells his talents to the devil.
I have a great honor to bestow upon you. I intend to add you two to my collection.
You want real heads on your wall?
As real as I can get them.
See the Master Monster Maker's Chamber of Horrors in color.
We're not talking about actors. We mean a real monster.
I brought her back. She'll live and I'll get her another body.
I know they're going to catch me, but don't let anyone see me like that. Please, doctor, help me.
Biologically speaking, it's of primary importance that man should want to mate. Hey, that works!
You don't get all your kicks from surfing, do you?
We want to be free to ride our machines without being hassled by the man. And we want to get loaded.
You think you're going to make a slave of the world? I'll see you in hell first!
The American International Podcast.
Are you ready?
Welcome back to the American International Podcast. I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
I'm Jeff Markin.
And in this episode, we're taking a course in DIY creature construction with How to Make a Monster from 1958.
How to Make a Monster was directed by Herbert L. Strock from an original story and screenplay by Kenneth Langtry and Herman Cohen, Kenneth Langtry being a pseudonym for Aben Candel. And How to Make a Monster was produced by Herman Cohen and James H. Nicholson for American International Pictures.
How to Make a Monster stars Robert H. Harris as Pete Dumond, Paul Brinegar as Rivero, Gary Conway as Tony Mantell / the Teenage Frankenstein, Gary Clarke as Larry Drake / the Teenage Werewolf, Malcolm Atterbury as Security Guard Richards, Dennis Cross as Security Guard Monhan, Morris Ankrum as Police Captain Hancock.
Also appearing are Walter Reed as Detective Thompson, Paul Maxwell as Jeffrey Clayton, Eddie Marr as John Nixon, Heather Ames as Arlene Dow, Robert Shayne as Gary Droz, John Phillips as Detective Jones, Pauline Myers as Millie, and a special appearance by John Ashley as himself.
How to Make a Monster opens with credits. James H. Nicholson and Samuel Z. Arkoff present How to Make a Monster, which a man painstakingly writes out for us.
He's writing onto a dressing room mirror, and this makes for a very long title sequence. Luckily, we don't have to watch him write out each word as they just start appearing on the screen while the hand busies himself drawing a portrait of the teenage werewolf in the corner.
Yeah, can you imagine every cast and crew name being written out one letter at a time?
After the credits, the camera zooms into that portrait, which dissolves into the actual teenage werewolf sitting in a makeup chair.
Makeup artist Pete Dumond is prepping Larry Drake for his next scene as the teenage werewolf. He gives him the makeup mirror, but Larry can't express how he feels about the job Pete's done because he's wearing his fangs.
After removing his fangs, he looks into the hand mirror that Pete had handed him, and Larry says that he nearly scared himself. He's impressed with the makeup work Pete has done on him, and says it's almost as scary as the Frankenstein monster Pete had made out of Tony.
Pete's assistant Rivero also praises Pete's work. Rivero says that for 25 years, Pete's been the master. He's created them all the monsters.
Then Pete starts talking about how the Lord created stuff too, and Larry says he never really thought about it like that, as I'm sure few have.
He thinks that each of his creations are as important as the other, so maybe that's what he meant? Larry says, sure, but I'm still scared of myself.
But now it's call time, and Pete accompanies Larry to the set. The two walk through the back lot of American International Studios.
Sure they do.
And they catch the eye of the other performers on the lot.
As well as a tour bus which is ejecting sightseers. A man in a pirate costume asks the director if their next film could feature a werewolf. The director asks, well, how did the werewolf end up in the ocean? And the pirate has no answer.
And the sound of a trombone quashes the pirate's hopes and dreams.
The trombone slide of mirth.
The middle-aged sightseers from that tour bus are standing around, and the tour guide informs them that they will be headed to Stage 3, where they are currently shooting the climax of Horrors of the Black Museum. Meanwhile, Pete and Larry continue strolling through the back lot. A couple of actors in scuba gear comment that at least they look normal.
On the stage, the director is very happy with Pete's work and calls out Tony, who's playing the teenage Frankenstein. His mask is a papier-mâché mess, but the director is thrilled, telling Pete to go rest on his laurels.
Then the director, whose name is Martin, introduces teenage Frankenstein to the teenage werewolf. Martin tells them that this is the big scene of the picture. The werewolf finally meets Frankenstein. It's got to be the battle of the century, and they've got to get it in one take.
He coaches the two on their fight choreography. Back in the makeup room, Pete is studying photos of his latest creations. He wants to turn those makeup jobs into masks for his collection.
Pete says that the teenage Frankenstein and teenage werewolf makeups are among the best work he's ever done.
And he loves working with teenagers. They're much more compliant and spirited than older actors. Boy, you could really take that the wrong way, couldn't you?
Pete remembers working with an actor named Perry Horton, who he had to disfigure for a car crash scene in a film. Rivero remembers him too, and that he didn't want to wear the makeup. Pete laughs that Horton expected to be run over by a truck and then get up without a scratch.
He was afraid that it would alienate his female fans. Two men barge in the studio. Pete gently tells them that knocking is customary, but these two say they don't have to knock. This is Jeff Clayton and John Nixon. They're the heads of NBN Associates. They're taking over the lot, and they're going to run it their way.
Pete says he read about that in the trades. Nixon and Clayton say that they are going to make some changes, and Pete is excited about the prospects. He invites them to sit down and apologizes for the chairs. Perhaps the new regime will provide better seating arrangements for Pete's workshop. The men just stare at him awkwardly, then explain that Pete's services will no longer be required once he's finished his current picture. Monster movies are passé. People want to see pretty girls and hear music. Pete says that he heard that story 25 years ago, back when he created his first werewolf, and that it was he who saved this studio from bankruptcy.
But Nixon is not here to argue with Pete about whether or not the horror cycle is over. Pete's out, but Pete's not through negotiating. He says horror movies aren't just entertainment. They're therapy to some people. We never get over our fears of the sinister. Through these pictures, we live out our hidden fears. Jeff Clayton tells him to live them out on his own time, not on their payroll.
Pete starts to protest again, but Nixon interrupts him, saying that he could have just sent over a cold pink slip, but instead he came over to talk to Pete in person. It's the human way, says Clayton. It certainly is, mumbles Pete. But Nixon does have some good news, too. They're going to give him 1 week severance pay.
Ooh, a whole week.
You can keep your severance pay, spits Pete. He doesn't want their charity. This room has been his home for over 25 years, and he's insulted that they're trying to soften the blow with a few cheap dollars.
He volunteers to leave when this picture is done, and they accept. They marvel that anyone would turn down money and tell him to enjoy his monsters. He says those monsters are better than some people he knows.
The suits leave, and Rivero asks Pete what they're going to do. Pete isn't sure just yet. He just knows that they're wrong and he's right.
And he'll prove he's right. He rushes out of the makeup room and onto the empty soundstage. On the way out, he stops by a pair of posters for I Was a Teenage Werewolf and I Was a Teenage Frankenstein. He tells the title characters' images that from his prehistoric men to his futuristic outer space rangers, don't they realize that his creations paid for this studio?
He made this studio, and he can bring it down. He'll destroy the studio, see it go up in flames before... No, he'll destroy them first. And he'll use the very monsters they mocked to bring them to an end.
Rivero walks up behind him and says that he heard voices. Pete says it was just his voice. He was reassuring his children that he won't let them perish. He'll stop these men from destroying them. Rivero asks, how? And Pete says, come on, I'll show you. And they exit the soundstage.
Now we're back in the makeup workshop, and Pete is cooking something in a bucket over a flame. He explains to Rivero that a monster is more than hair and makeup and foam rubber. It requires the human spirit to infuse the monster and bring it to life.
If he didn't believe in them, they wouldn't believe in themselves. Pete pours something into the goop he's cooking. Rivero asks what that is, and Pete says he's adding a new ingredient he discovered into the foundation cream. He's been working on this for hours. He asks Rivero to remember that one time he added Novocaine to the makeup for the prehistoric man. That actor forgot his lines because of it, and Pete had to hypnotize him to get him to remember.
Rivero does remember this. The actor could only remember when Pete released him from the hypnosis. Pete says he'll do the same with the actors of this film.
Rivero says he mustn't do this, but Pete says they're fighting for their lives here. This stuff will act like a prefrontal lobotomy and make the wearers passive and ready to bend to his will. Rivero looks dumbstruck, but then he kind of always looks that way.
Outside, a security guard, Monhan, is on his rounds, and he stops to chat with the guard at the gate, Richards.
They say that nothing's going on, just a light in Pete's makeup room. He's married to his job. Monhan is annoyed that there's no real crime there. Richards says that he's lucky that the only thugs he encounters are bit players. If you want action, join the commandos, he suggests.
Now it's morning and people are arriving at the studio. Larry goes into the makeup workshop and sits down in the chair. He notices that Pete looks glum. How would you feel if you received a death sentence? Asks Pete. And Pete explains what's going on with him and convinces Larry that his career is over as well.
And no more horror films? No more work for Larry.
Larry isn't concerned about this, though. He's sure his agent will find him another job. But Pete says that he knows this town, and the first question a casting agent asks is, what was your last part? If the horror cycle is indeed over, Larry will have been typecast as a horror actor and may never work again. At least until the next horror cycle comes around.
Larry picks up what Pete is putting down, however illogical. He asks Pete what they can do. Pete's happy to help with this, if Larry places himself in Pete's hands, and Larry agrees. Pete starts applying that new foundation cream, warning Larry that he'll feel a tightening and tingling effect, but it's nothing to be concerned about.
As he continues applying the foundation, Pete tells Larry that he wants him to do his scene well today, and after filming, he wants him to do something for him before coming back to the lab to have his makeup removed.
Now we're in the viewing room, and one of the studio's directors are looking at film rushes. Nixon congratulates the director of this new musical on a job well done. The director leaves, and Nixon says he may as well watch the Werewolf vs. Frankenstein rushes.
Clayton has no interest in this and excuses himself. So the projectionist threads up the Werewolf vs. Frankenstein rushes, and on the screen, the werewolf meets the Frankenstein monster. As Nixon is watching this, Larry, as the werewolf, pops up behind Nixon and strangles him.
He's frothing at the mouth the whole time. Now we're in the makeup workshop. Larry the werewolf answers Pete's questions. No one saw you? You came right back here? Larry, in a daze, nods yes to both. Pete says that he'll forget everything once Pete takes his makeup off. But then Pete spies blood on Larry's werewolf mitts and tells Rivero to wash them off.
Rivero is concerned that they might get caught, but Pete assures him that they'll have nothing to worry about. Then Pete wakes up Larry and smiles. Now the police are investigating the death of John Nixon. While the coroner looks over the body, the two detectives question the projectionist who screened the rushes for Nixon the night before. The projectionist seems annoyed that he's being questioned. He hurriedly answers their questions. He says he didn't see or hear anything because he only watched the movie and heard the movie. He set up that last set of rushes, then he went home, and the guard at the gate can confirm when he left.
The projectionist is dismissed. The medical examiner shows Thompson, one of the detectives, that Nixon's wristwatch was cracked. It stopped at 8:34, giving a time of death. Then the medical examiner says that Nixon was attacked from behind by someone with fiendish strength. His neck is broken.
And there are sharp wounds on the man's neck that look like fang marks. So what do we do now? Look for a monster? Asks Jones, the other detective. You don't have to look far, jokes the medical examiner. I think they make them to order right here at the studio. We're not talking about actors. We mean a real monster, says Thompson. Then they all disperse, leaving Nixon's corpse sitting in a chair.
That line is part of our open, so hearing that was a treat. And now the headlines read, Eastern studio head found strangled in Hollywood murder. This is the LA Times, by the way. Jeff Clayton is reading the papers, talking to the cops. They tell him that it looks like an animal attack, but Clayton doesn't want speculation. He wants answers.
Nixon was his friend. For an Eastern executive to come out west on his first job and end up dead, these things just don't happen.
Not to executives.
The detectives ask if Nixon had any enemies out here. Not enemies, but certainly rivals, says Clayton. The detectives ask if he had antagonized anyone. Clayton again says no, though they gave out 100 or so pink slips, but that's to be expected under a new regime.
Detective Thompson says that would make a lot of people unhappy, but Clayton says it's part of the industry. And they'll probably all get new jobs anyway, so they wouldn't have any reason to kill. Detective Thompson says that they want to solve this just as much as Clayton does. Hollywood murders may be okay on screen, but not in real life.
Now we find ourselves at a party, and Larry is dancing with a girl, Arlene Dow, but Larry is feeling a little woozy, and he has to sit down.
Arlene thinks that it may be because of all the police officers and press around, but Larry says that they barely spoke to him. They just asked him how it feels to be a monster, laughing at him.
Arlene suggests that maybe he gave his all to being the werewolf in the movie, and he doesn't have any strength left. Larry says that she may have a point, and he just feels as if he should be running away.
Arlene says he just needs to calm down, and Larry agrees, and then they resume dancing.
Now we're back at the makeup workshop, and security guard Monhan stops by for a chat. Monhan says that he heard that this is Pete's last job with the studio. Then Monhan says that he's not like the other studio cops. They might settle for a soft touch, but he has bigger ambitions, and he has ideas of how he would run things if he were the head cop at the studio. And he might have a line on how to get a promotion. Take that Nixon killing, for instance. Monhan wasn't satisfied with the job the big brass did, so he's been poking around on his own and keeping notes in his little black book. For example, Monhan has discovered that Pete and Rivero didn't check out the night of the murder until 9:12 p.m. Pete says that it's not unusual for him to stay late on days with a heavy makeup job. You can tell that to Captain Hancock down at the station, Monhan says smugly. He has all that information in his little black book. The studio will be around a long time, and one day he expects to be its chief of police. Pete says he admires the man's ambition, and Monhan leaves saying he'll be seeing Pete downtown.
Once alone, Pete demands that Rivero help him out, quick. In the next scene, we see Monhan patrolling the empty lot. He walks all around the offices, the editing room, and ends up in the commissary, and he goes to get a coffee. He's surprised by Pete, done up as Mr. Hyde, who clubs him with a mallet. Once down and presumably dead, Pete steals his little black book. All the while, Richards, the other security guard, is sitting in his booth at the gate listening to music loud.
Back at the workshop, Pete has removed his makeup and he tells Rivero that they've got to check out now. And he tells Rivero that he's not to say anything. They go to the front gate and check out with Richards.
Richards says, there's no overtime for you, Pete, though you've earned it. Meaningfully, Pete says, yes, we accomplished a lot tonight.
Pete says they're just going to get a few hours rest, then it's back to work. Sometime later, Richards realizes that Monhan has never returned, so he goes off to look for him. He finds him and makes a call to the real cops.
Now we're with Detectives Thompson and Jones viewing the scene of the crime. Thompson says it looks like Monhan put up a fight, but as we saw earlier, he really didn't. Richards agrees, saying that he's surprised that he never heard anything. He says he went looking for him after not seeing him for 20 or 30 minutes. Thompson asks if anyone arrived or left late, and Richards mentions Pete and Rivero.
We'd better get their story, says Jones. Richards doesn't have Pete's address, but payroll would have it. Anyway, Pete will be back in a few hours to prepare for the day's shoot.
He's got to make up the teenage Frankenstein.
But Richards adds that he thinks they're barking up the wrong tree. Pete's harmless.
The next day, Thompson questions Pete. Pete says he never heard anything and he spent the whole night there. He was preparing his special foundation cream, as if that matters. Thompson asks if monsters are all he does. They're my specialty, says Pete.
Jones mentions that his kid likes monsters, and he has a birthday coming up. Say no more, says Pete. I'd be thrilled to make him up as a monster for his birthday.
Jones tells Pete to not make any trips, and Pete agrees. He's not budging until the picture is over. And now for a musical interlude.
Pete is over at another part of the lot where they're shooting that musical. He waits patiently while John Ashley performs You've Got to Have EU
with dancing girls. All the while, Clayton has been watching appreciatively as Pete looms menacingly behind him.
John Ashley got his performance in one take, and the director calls for lunch. Then Clayton turns to Pete and says, you see, this is what the kids want today.
Not fright wigs and masks. This is progress. Cars replace horses and buggies, etc., etc. Pete grimly says that the wheels of progress turn no matter who gets run over. Clayton says, that's the way the footage cuts.
Later in the workshop, Tony is in the makeup chair, and Pete is getting ready to turn him into Frankenstein when there's a knock on the door. It's a couple of girls writing a story for their school paper.
They want the teenage slant, they say, but for Tony they only have one question. How does it feel to be the last of the Frankensteins?
Pete asks them who told him that. They say it was Mr. Clayton. They had to get his permission to come onto the lot, and he was the one who suggested the question.
Tony says that first or last, he's going to do his best. The girls are satisfied with this tidbit of information and say they'll get their pictures from publicity and go. It's not very good journalism. Pete says, you see, they're cutting the ground from underneath us.
Pete begins applying Tony's makeup. As he does this, he gives him instructions that he will follow his instructions and become the monster he will appear to be.
He tells Tony that he'll now have the strength to destroy his real enemies.
That night, Jeff Clayton returns home and pulls his car into his garage. He steps out of the car and finds himself face to face with the Frankenstein monster. The monster strangles Clayton, then runs. As he's fleeing, he mows over a woman, who screams at the sight of him.
As you would. Now we're with Rivero and Pete at Rivero's home. Rivero frets that Tony hasn't returned yet. Pete tells him to calm down. Tony will return to his house as he was programmed. Then the buzzer rings and Rivero lets Tony in. Without knowing what happened, Pete says that Tony did good and will remember nothing.
Then he tells Rivero to help remove the makeup. The next day at the workshop, Rivero is reading the newspaper headline about the third studio murder, shaking Hollywood, and how it follows the morbid Hollywood tradition of death in threes. Pete snatches the paper from him, griping that he's already read it 3 times. Rivero is concerned about his future. The paper says that the studio is closing. Pete tells Rivero that he's taken care of him for the last 25 years, and he'll continue to take care of him and see that he doesn't starve, provided Rivero keeps his mouth shut.
Rivero agrees readily. Pete's the master, he's the assistant. Silent assistant, Pete emphasizes.
Then Pete drops the bombshell that they've been invited downtown for routine questioning and reminds Rivero that he did agree to keep his mouth shut.
On the way out, they run into Gary, Larry's agent. Gary's got a beef with Pete. Don't tell my boy he'll never work again, he says. Getting him work is my job. And for your information, Gary has 3 gigs lined up for Larry. He angrily tells Pete to butt out of Larry's life. Pete says he only suggested ... but Gary doesn't want to hear it. He can get Larry a job anytime he wants. Heck, he could get Pete a job as a heavy if he joined the union. Pete thanks him for the offer, and then Gary storms off.
At the police station, we see that Pete, Rivero, and Richards, the security guard, have all been brought in for questioning. They're waiting their turn while Millie is being questioned. Millie is the woman Tony knocked down when he was running away from Clayton's house. Millie is able to give them a description of the perpetrator, which the police decide to disregard.
She says he was literally a monster with brute strength. She tells them that it was around 12:30 a.m. when it happened. They tell her they may need her to ID a suspect. She's not thrilled but willing to do her part. She's dismissed.
Next, they bring in Richards. They want to discuss the Monhan killing. The police think it's strange that Richards didn't hear anything that night, and Richards confesses that he had been listening to the radio a little louder than he probably should have. Besides, how was he supposed to know there was a killer loose?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe the previous murder would have been a clue?
Thompson asks if there's anyone on the lot who might have had a grudge. Richard says no, it was like a big happy family. Well, it's not happy now, snaps Thompson. He tells Richards to go back to his post, keep an eye out, and turn down the music. Then Pete and Rivero are called in for questioning.
Captain Hancock, who's there along with Jones and Thompson, tells Pete that they have a witness who says she saw a literal monster. Someone who was very strong and had his eye popping out of the socket. Pete thinks she must have been hysterical, but Hancock says no, she was very sure. But Hancock suspects it was an amateur dressed up as a weirdie who committed the crime and asks Pete his opinion. Pete says that his job is to create whatever look the studio requires. Sure, he makes monsters, but he doesn't build violence into the character.
Then they turn that questioning to Rivero. Rivero says he didn't do anything, and Pete says that he wouldn't know anything about anything, but Hancock wants Rivero to speak for himself. Thompson gets in Rivero's face, but Rivero only says he's a good assistant and does whatever Pete asks him. Thompson grabs Rivero by the shirt collar, and Pete stands up and tells him to leave Rivero alone. Just because they don't have a suspect is no reason to manhandle him. Hancock wants to know why they won't just be more cooperative. Isn't there anyone on the lot they could think of who might carry a grudge? What about the monsters? Pete says that thanks to his makeup, they may look like monsters, but underneath it, they're just actors. Thompson tells Rivero that they aren't finished with him, and Pete and Rivero are dismissed, and the detectives compare notes. Thompson doesn't like the way that the assistant is under Pete's thumb.
Hancock asks Thompson if he thought he had something with Rivero, but Thompson confesses that he was just taking pot shots. Hancock believes that Pete and Rivero know more about fake monsters than real ones. They live in a world of make-believe. In the parking lot, Pete needles Rivero for almost giving them both up. Rivero admits to being nervous. He doesn't like that one cop's threat that he's not done with Rivero yet. Rivero says he'd never give them away, but Pete's not convinced.
Pete says that now that they've been questioned, the police will leave them alone, but Rivero isn't so sure about that. Does Pete think that they'll solve this case? They almost did with your help, says Pete. If I hadn't stopped you, you'd have told them everything. Rivero says he wouldn't, but Pete isn't through with him yet. Why did you tell them you'd do what I tell you to do? Because I do, says Rivero. Yeah, but you're not supposed to say that to the police. Rivero asks about Larry and Tony. The police will be questioning them soon, but Pete assures them that they are still under his control, and in fact will be waiting for them at the studio when they return. And he's going to make sure that they stay under his control.
They get in their car to head back to the studio.
Back inside the station, a lab technician reports that grease paint and putty were found under Clayton's fingernails. He says they've already checked it against commercial products. What they found is unique, so they'll be making calls to theaters and studios. Captain Hancock tells them to hold the phone. There's one studio they're going to look into first, and he asks the lab tech to come along. They may need him to make a spot analysis. So bring your equipment.
Now we're in Pete's makeup room. Larry and Tony are there waiting for him, but all Pete's stuff is packed up by someone else. He didn't even get the dignity of putting his own stuff in boxes. Pete tells the boys that he's sorry for the delay. They said they wanted to say goodbye. Pete suggests they do that all at his house and have some food and drink. They agree if they don't have to stay too long. They both have dates.
Pete starts packing up what's left and hands a box to the boys and asks them to help Rivero load the car. After everyone is gone, Pete takes a last look around. He grabs a couple of things and throws some of his leftover foundation into the trash. Then Pete takes the sign with his name off the door and he starts to leave, but Martin, the director of Werewolf vs. Frankenstein, stops in to see him. Martin says that he hopes that they have the opportunity to work together again. He might be down now, but it will only take one job for the whole horror cycle to start up again, and Pete can be ready when that day comes.
They'll be clamoring for him. On the way off the lot, Pete stops his car at the gate. Rivero, Tony, and Larry are all in there with him. Pete tells Richards that there's a bottle of bourbon in his room. He never touches his stuff, and he wants Richards to have it. Pete drives off the lot just as the cops are arriving. They go to the gate and ask for Pete and are told that Pete just left, so they opt to check out Pete's makeup room first.
They go inside the workshop and see that everything has been cleaned out, except for some stuff left in the trash can.
So the tech gets out his equipment and starts to examine the substance.
Next we see that Pete has taken Rivero, Larry, and Tony to his home in Oz.
They open the door and go over the rainbow.
Suddenly, the film is in vibrant color. Well, not so vibrant color.
A little muted.
Pete leads them into a room where the masks of the creatures he has created adorn the walls. Pete starts lighting candles and tells them he'll tell them the story of each of his children. But for now, let's just look at them.
He tells the boys that this is his cathedral. Rivero says that maybe they should get some refreshments. Pete agrees, but before he and Rivero go to the kitchen, he commands the boys to drink in the visual feast of the masks on the walls.
Rivero tells the boys that Pete never has guests here, so they should feel honored. Oh, we do, says Larry. Pete and Rivero leave, and Tony and Larry start to discuss how wigged out they are right now.
They're both feeling creeped out, and Tony wants to go. Larry does too, but he doesn't want to upset Pete. They both talk about what Pete said while making them up. About enemies and never working again. They're both a little hazy on the details.
Larry says the same thing happened to him, and he was going to ask Tony about that, but he forgot. Not like he forgot in a careless way, it just sort of left him, you know?
In the kitchen, Rivero tells Pete that it was a mistake to bring the boys here. Once they get other jobs, Pete will lose his hold over them. Rivero wants to go too, to his brother's ranch in Arizona. Pete tells Rivero that he wants to leave Pete to face the consequences alone. Rivero denies this.
Pete questions Rivero's ability to stay silent, but Rivero insists that he wouldn't say anything.
If anything happens to Pete, it will be because of the boys and not Rivero.
Rivero has been nothing but loyal.
Pete sees what Rivero is getting at, and then grabs a knife from a table and turns around and stabs Rivero in the gut, because Rivero was going to faint on him.
Pete goes back to the gallery and brings those drinks in for Larry and Tony. They ask where Rivero is, and Pete says that he's making dinner. The boys tell Pete they have dates tonight, and they should be going. They can't stay for dinner. But Pete says they can't leave just yet. He has a great honor to bestow upon them. He wants to preserve their heads on the wall with the rest of his collection. He always wanted a werewolf and a Frankenstein monster to add. Real heads on your wall? Asks Larry. As real as I can get them, says Pete. He explains he just wants to get their measurements for the replicas. Photographs just won't cut it. Then Larry and Tony level with him.
By now, Tony's heard enough. This place is creepy and they want out, and Pete locked the door. Larry says that he and Tony know that he did something to them. Pete says, "Oh, I see. I will let you out and you'll go running to the police." Tony asks what the police have to do with anything. Pete explains that they've each committed one of the 3 studio murders. Tony calls Pete crazy. "Not crazy enough to let you escape," says Pete.
Pete comes at them with a knife, and there's a struggle, and one of the candles is knocked over. The curtain around the room goes up in flames. "What have you done, you fool?" cries Pete. My children are dying." He watches in horror as the masks start to melt. Pete grabs at his chest and falls to the floor. As the masks go up in flames, Larry and Tony run to the door, but they're still locked in.
Luckily, the cops arrive just then. They break into Pete's house, and then, smelling smoke, break down the door where the inferno is raging. The door to Pete's flaming chamber opens, and Larry and Tony are standing there. The cops ask about Rivero. Larry and Tony don't know where he is, but Tony points to where Pete is smoldering on the floor. Then everyone leaves the house, just as the end appears on a wall of flames. And indeed, that's the end. Welcome back to the American International Podcast, where we're talking about How to Make a Monster from 1958.
In January of 1958, AIP announced that Herman Cohen had been signed to produce How to Make a Monster. In June of 58, it was announced that Paul Dunley was contracted to compose and conduct the original score for the film.
The film's proposed title was the stuff of jokes to some Hollywood columnists. Dick Murray in his column said, "Herman Cohen, who produced I Was a Teenage Werewolf and I Was a Teenage Frankenstein, has been signed to turn out How to Make a Monster. The next generation can look forward to seeing I Was Dracula's Grandson." A blurb in Johnny Robinson's Video Versions column, published January 10, 1958, joked that, quote, "It would seem that American International Pictures is interested in attracting the do-it-yourself addicts to movies. They have a new feature on deck that will carry the title How to Make a Monster." Erskine Jones in his Hollywood Today column said, "In self-defense, I think I'll threaten to make a do-it-yourself movie titled How to Bankrupt Producers of Monster Movies." He also joked that he hoped that the DIY kits are too late for this year's Christmas trade.
How to Make a Monster was filmed at Ziv Studios, as AIP often shot their films on location or on rented sound stages. A few posters of AIP movies were put on display, and fake signs were put in place to create the illusion that this was the American International backlot. A studio tour group was promised a trip to the set of the upcoming Horrors of the Black Museum, which was an Anglo-amalgamated production filmed in England. According to historian Tom Weaver, who did the commentary on the Scream Factory Blu-ray release of How to Make a Monster, the fake studio sign remained up for several months after the film was completed, until a Ziv studio exec finally noticed and had it removed.
In April of 1958, it was announced How to Make a Monster was in production. Also that month, the Los Angeles Mirror reported that Robert H. Harris would star as the makeup man hero of How to Make a Monster. Their words, not mine.
Philip Shear, the makeup artist who worked on I Was a Teenage Werewolf and Frankenstein, also did the makeup for How to Make a Monster. Paul Blaisdell created a brand new mask that he named Aunt Esmeralda, which he created specifically to be burned in the fire scene, designed so that as the face melted, a grisly skull was revealed underneath.
The last 10 minutes of the film are presented in color, a popular movie gimmick of the time, one that AIP had used before in Teenage Frankenstein and War of the Colossal Beast, although for a much briefer period. The idea was to best feature the mask from several AIP releases designed by makeup artist Paul Blaisdell. Director Herb Strock's account of the fire in the film's climax is that the special effects person started it before the cameras were rolling. He said, quote, "We had a special effects man named Charlie Duncan. Drunken Duncan, we called him. He set the place on fire before we were ready. I shoved all the actors onto the set and grabbed the cameraman and told him to start filming. I got behind the other camera and we ran the actors through the scene before the place burned to the ground."
Many of Pete Dumond's children, destroyed in the fire, were props originally created by Paul Blaisdell for earlier AIP films, and he actually allowed some of the props to be destroyed. They include the face of Beulah from It Conquered the World, an alien head from Invasion of the Saucer Men, and the Dr. Jekyll mask from Attack of the Puppet People. Blaisdell asked the producers not to destroy the leopard mask from Catgirl that he created, but it did not survive the fire at the end of the movie. Tragically, the mask was never seen in the film, nor was any footage shot of the mask being destroyed, so its destruction was unnecessary. This incident made Blaisdell quite unhappy with the studio. There was at least one survivor of the Inferno, however. the monster head from The She Creature.
Herman Cohen says he cast John Ashley as a singer at the request of James H. Nicholson, who had just put Ashley under a long-term contract with the studio. Ashley was having some minor success as a recording artist at the time.
In a 1997 interview for Rudolph Gray's book, Nightmare of Ecstasy, The Life and Art of Edward D. Wood Jr., Wood's widow Kathy claimed that Ed always felt that the idea for How to Make a Monster was stolen from him by AIP producer Sam Markoff, saying, Eddie gave them a script for approval, and they changed the characters a little bit around. Eddie had written it for Lugosi. It was about this old horror actor who couldn't get work anymore, so he took vengeance out on the studio. Markoff denied Wood's claim was true, stating that Herman Cohen originated the entire project on his own.
How to Make a Monster was released as the first feature on a double bill with Teenage Caveman, beginning on July 26 of 1958.
A syndicated news article by Clarence Rawlings said producer Herman Cohen conducted a special screen test of How to Make a Monster. A dozen teenage boys and girls viewed the movie while being tested by Dr. John L. Boyer, a San Diego internal medical specialist, for a possible increase in blood pressures, pulse rates, and respiration during exciting periods of the film. Cohen reported that teenage girls apparently can withstand the shocks of horror films better than their boyfriends. This also led Cohen to conclude that it was safe and desirable to materially increase the terror quotient in horror films aimed at teenagers, and that horror films have actually gained support from some of the nation's leading psychiatrists who saw horror films as a form of self-administered psychiatric therapy.
The Los Angeles Mirror reported that the State Theater in downtown LA would be providing its own monster tomorrow for the How to Make a Monster screening. Ronnie Morgan will be the weird creature stalking the theater lobbies at autograph parties, the article read.
An ad placed in the Two Rivers, Wisconsin Reporter on November 1st sought a woman 18 to 88 and offered a $10 reward for a woman willing to sit alone through a private midnight showing in a completely darkened theater and watch How to Make a Monster. Applications were to be made in person to the manager of the theater. The winning applicant was Mrs. Helen Engelbrett of Manitowoc, and the paper published a photo of her on the edge of her seat, alone in the theater, on November 6th.
AIP's press book recommended that theater owners create a contest asking residents, via the local news, to turn themselves into monsters, with the most fiendish entries winning a chance to appear in a parade of monsters on the theater stage. The winners, to be selected by audience applause, could win prizes from local merchants. They also suggested having a boxing ring set up in the back of a flatbed truck and having two men in monster masks in the back duking it out as the truck was driven around town, of course, with signage promoting the movie. Taglines for How to Make a Monster include, see the ghastly ghouls in flaming color.
Hair-raising, see the madman's gruesome chamber of horrors.
Terrifying, see the savage attack of the monster at midnight.
Horrifying, see the teenage werewolf versus the teenage Frankenstein.
Blood-curdling, see a man turned into a monster before your very eyes.
It will scare the living yell out of you.
Oh no. Sam Markoff, in his autobiography, Flying Through Hollywood by the Seat of My Pants, said, in How to Make a Monster, they ungratefully kill the movie studio executives, I presume that meant us, who have nurtured their rebirth.
Bill Copeland in the Sarasota Journal wrote, you can be sure of success in anything you try these days if you work the word teenage in there. Look at the song hits, A Teenage Prayer, Teenage Queen, and miserably many more. The big surge in fright pictures is because the kids of all ages have learned to laugh at them. When the Frankenstein monster first came out, it had audiences in cold sweat. These days, we have been gimmicked to death and there isn't much that they can do that we can't see through. What should scare us is not the rash of horror movies themselves, but the fact that they have become the most lucrative type of movie coming out of Hollywood.
Bob Weirley, reviewing the film for the Long Beach, California Independent, did not care for How to Make a Monster, writing, students of the fine old art of monster making may feel somewhat hoodwinked when they plunk down their money to enjoy the feature attraction. Just to keep the record straight, How to Make a Monster does not really instruct one in the trade of fabricating fiends. However, How to Make a Monster does provide a certain educational value. It teaches one to save his money when American International Films markets one of its grisly productions. Weirley also said that John Ashley's musical number was one of the film's assorted crimes of violence.
Lowell E. Redlings, in his The Hollywood Scene column, though, said, the film has a rather good song, You've Got to Have EU, a joint effort of Paul Dunlap and Skip Redwine, and the film had a well-chosen cast, mixed up in a weirdie, for want of a better word, that at times isn't half bad.
Art Cullison, in his On With the Show column, wrote, How to Make a Monster is unique in that it kids in earnest the prospect that we have reached the end of the cycle of horror films. The funny part about all that is that How to Make a Monster is not a horror film. There's nothing shocking about the monsters, so it develops into a mystery suspense. He also wrote, surprisingly, there are occasional bits of good dialogue among the Hollywood executives. You don't often get this in a scare picture.
The Catholic League of Decency declared How to Make a Monster was morally unobjectionable for adults and adolescents.
The Los Angeles Examiner said of How to Make a Monster, "It is not a do-it-yourself treatise on how to fashion your old household eyesores. Rather, it's a torpid tale without even the so-called horror, which is supposed to attract adolescents."
Harrison's report's review of How to Make a Monster said, "If horror melodramas appeal to your patrons, this one should satisfy them easily. For, in addition to murders and situations in which the lives of sympathetic characters are placed in danger, the story idea is novel and interesting. The picture, on the whole, is less horrific than the usual run of horror films, but has effective suspense values. The closing reel, where a raging fire destroys the makeup man and a room full of his monstrous creations, is not only exciting, but also unique in that a switch is made from black and white to color photography, making the conflagration visually spectacular."
Dick Williams in the Grand Junction, Colorado Daily Sentinel rated How to Make a Monster as good, but said, quote, "More cleverness, a la Alfred Hitchcock, might have been exercised in the three primary slangs. But Monster realistically gives the public backstage glimpses of a Hollywood film studio. The cast is uniformly good, even to the bit players, but no female star brightens the screen. How could they forget to put a glamour queen in a melodrama like this?" What does that mean, Jeff? Why was there no female presence in this movie? Or very little, actually.
The answer, Herman Cohen. We talked about Teenage Frankenstein in an earlier episode, and Herman Cohen was a homosexual man, and that movie had more than its share of homosexual undertones. And there were some of them here that might have gone unnoticed if I hadn't watched Teenage Frankenstein first, where they were just so abundant and obvious.
It wasn't just homosexual undertones, but inappropriate older man, teenage boy undertones, maybe overtones.
The way Pete always refers to Tony and Larry as my boy just makes me uncomfortable.
It does. He thinks of them as his children, but he also wants them totally under his control. And he says he likes working with teenagers. They have spirit and spark that you don't find in older actors. And that scene, given everything I know about what happens in Hollywood these days, and always has, it just made me a little queasy. Do you think the last reel being in color was necessary?
I don't think it was necessary at all. I don't even think it was all that effective because being the entire reel, it starts way too early.
When should it have started? Like when they go into the room and see the mask for the first time?
That's basically when it did. I mean, they would walk through the hallway into the room.
Right.
But I think maybe when the fire started, just at the very end, I think that would have been more effective.
It was really weird. It was sort of that Wizard of Oz moment. All of a sudden, they're in color for no reason. There's a lot of gimmicky stuff in this movie.
I think that if they hadn't used that same gimmick in I Was a Teenage Frankenstein, it would have been more effective.
It was only in color for a few seconds. He gets electrocuted and it goes color and then basically it's over.
And I think it works better under those conditions.
Yeah, they're not going to do it in color from start to finish. It's just weird to see that happen. And like you said, it doesn't really add anything to the picture.
I've seen trailers for this film that have the color sequence in color and leave it in black and white. And granted, the surviving trailers are all pretty faded, so the color isn't that vibrant anyway, but I really don't think it adds anything compared to seeing the whole thing in black and white.
What did you think of the other gimmick in this movie where this was supposedly set on the American International backlot?
I think it's a cute idea, but they weren't really consistent with that. I mean, I guess maybe the average moviegoer wouldn't realize the difference, but the things that were going on just didn't feel like American International, despite the signage.
What I thought was weird is that it creates this continuity problem where Gary Conway is listed as the star of I Was a Teenage Frankenstein on the poster for I Was a Teenage Frankenstein, yet his character name here is Tony. But it's the same guy. But they didn't have Michael Landon return as a teenage werewolf, so we could kind of understand that these are two different productions. But they're in the same universe, but Gary Conway is now Tony.
Yeah, I had heard that Michael Landon had turned down the chance to appear in the sequel, and that Herman Cohen really took it personally because he credits himself for making Michael Landon, but I don't think he was solely responsible for Michael Landon's success.
Well, no, and then that also just creates this world where, it just makes those movies fictional, but this movie is real.
I enjoy when AIP goes meta, though, and they do a self-referential bit, but here it just was so much of it that it wasn't consistent, so it just felt a little weird. But there was a lot of it. This probably has more of that than any other film in the AIP oeuvre. We saw references to I Was a Teenage Frankenstein and Terror from the Year 5000, where the characters go to see the movie. And that was just a cute little thing, and I think that works better if it's just a mention. In Beach Party, they play a record that is on the AIP record label, and Dorothy Malone makes a reference to American International Pictures using this idea for a film.
And in Attack of the Puppet People, they go to see the Bands and Colossal Man at the drive-in.
Yeah, and that stuff's cute. I enjoy when they do that.
But then again, I do like the idea of a murder mystery happening as a movie's being filmed. So I think that the concept was really good.
Well, it's a concept that's been used over and over and over again through the years.
But they could have made themselves a fake studio name, and then we wouldn't have to see the posters from the movie that create that continuity glitch.
Yeah, I'm kind of on the fence because I do like those moments, but having as much as it does is just not consistent. It doesn't feel like it's all from American International Pictures or Studios in this case. So the history just doesn't fly with what I know.
And what audiences would have known at the time, too.
I don't know if audiences were
that savvy.
Yeah, I don't know that they would have cared who was putting out the movies that they were watching. I always did, but I was a nerd for that stuff.
Maybe not, but it did just happen, too. These are movies that had just come out a few months prior to this one. Probably not even an entire year, as fast as AIP created these movies.
Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if some people didn't realize that Gary Clarke wasn't Michael Landon.
Well, that's true.
They kind of resemble each other, especially with the makeup on. They look exactly alike.
But I imagine that if Michael Landon had played this character, he would be so much more intense than Gary Clarke as Larry Drake, especially given the character that he played in I Was a Teenage Werewolf.
But he wouldn't be playing that character. He'd be playing the actor who played that character who wasn't Michael Landon, I guess.
Yeah, I guess.
He'd be playing Larry Drake.
Probably ought not to go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, maybe if they had at least Gary Conway playing himself.
Yes.
It would have fixed a lot of the inconsistencies that we see.
John Ashley got to play himself.
Yeah, how about that?
I could have lived without that song.
AIP had already discovered, through I Was a Teenage Werewolf actually, that putting a song in the movie kind of helps it out with the teenage crowd. And they had this personality they wanted to exploit, so they threw John Ashley in there.
But the way it's done is so clunky. It's like a complete interruption of the movie where we're just on this other soundstage and they're doing this badly choreographed, not so exciting number. John Ashley's up there trying to snap his fingers to the beat and not getting it most of the time. And these girls are dancing around him and they're not terribly great either. And it's just on this dinky little stage. It's not set in any kind of a context for being part of a movie. It's just a performance. And it just feels like a really ham-handed insert.
And it's not a very good song. What is EU?
Well, he says it differently every time he sings it. It's EU or EU or woo. And then the song doesn't explain what it is.
But you got to have it.
And then when you do have it, you're cooking with gas.
I think the most disappointing part about How to Make a Monster is that all those masks were destroyed at the end.
Oh, yeah, that's just tragic. Admittedly, the Beulah monster was basically on its last legs at that point.
Well, it's just a piece of it on the wall. They just sliced off its face.
They hadn't stored them to keep them preserved.
And they wouldn't have survived till now anyway. That stuff doesn't last very long.
But that was not a very dignified way for them to go. And we just talked about Catgirl last week. And so just to know how long that mask lasted, it couldn't have been very long. And it was destroyed for nothing.
Even It Conquered the World was only 2 years prior. So none of these masks were that old.
I thought it was funny that they mentioned that the horror cycle was over. That's their whole justification for not doing any more horror movies. The horror cycle has never been over. Every time I look up one of these movies and newspaper articles from the day, I'll find an article that says there's this new rash of horror films, and they use it to comment on the morality of the day in a negative way. But there's always a new rash of horror films, no matter when I look these up.
The reason that they have horror films is to make a statement about the horrors of the world, and there are always horrors in the world. So there's always a place for a horror film.
Wow, there should be a bumper crop of them next year. It's just funny that they would use that as the impetus for everything that happens in this movie. Nobody wants horror movies anymore. If that were the case, AIP would never have succeeded.
It's the idea that people are looking at horror films and saying, this causes this in society, when actually it's society that's causing them to make horror films. They're looking at it backwards.
But this movie does try to justify watching horror films, even saying that they're therapeutic. So I think that it's arguing with itself.
Well, that's the argument they're presenting to continue to make them. And whether that's accurate or not, it's a good argument, I guess.
Well, Herman Cohen believed it.
You have to come up with something good to counteract the people saying that you're destroying society.
No, society's destroying itself. We're just chronicling it.
And as that story in the Grand Junction Daily Sentinel said, it's a shame that there wasn't a place for more women in this film. We had Arlene, who was in that one scene, dancing with Larry, and I don't really think that scene needed to be in the film. It didn't add anything.
No.
We had Millie, the woman who was knocked down by Frankenstein as he's leaving the murder scene, and the two reporters, Jane and Marilyn. Another scene that didn't really add anything.
No, but it did give Gary Conway something to do, and he didn't have all that much to do in this movie. He doesn't even appear till midway through.
Well, he appears early on, but he's in the makeup.
Right, that's what I mean, his face.
And then there are some miscellaneous dancers and people on the back lot, but they're just there to add some realism, I guess, because women do exist in the world.
But you could say that about a lot of movies where there's a token woman or not even any real women characters.
But you don't really see that in AIP movies because we had Sorority Girl, we had Drag Strip Girl, we had Cat Girl.
Yeah.
Even Blood of Dracula, the main character is a girl. I mean, they tended to throw girls front and center. So it's weird to see a movie where they're not.
There's not even a real love interest or anything like that. It doesn't faze me so much because I've seen it so many other movies where there's barely any female presence. So I didn't really think of it until I saw that quote from the newspaper reporter who reviewed it that, oh yeah, there weren't that many women in this movie.
I guess making movies is a boys' club. At least it would be if Herman Cohen had his way.
Begrudgingly using women, but not using them very well or very much. All right, well, now I think it's time for us to grade How to Make a Monster, and we do that using our AIP scale where A is awesome, I is intermediate, and P is pathetic. How would you grade How to Make a Monster, Jeff?
I think How to Make a Monster is a fine film. I don't really think it works as a sequel to either I Was a Teenage Frankenstein or I Was a Teenage Werewolf, mostly because of the inconsistencies we mentioned in the studio plot, how this is supposed to be AIP and it's not really. You have the same actor portraying Frankenstein in both, kind of. I mean, you do have the same actor, but he's not necessarily the same character. And different actor playing the Teenage Werewolf, but he looks exactly like him in that makeup, except that he drools milk. And as I said, I do enjoy the self-referential stuff to some degree. This one was a little over the top. But all in all, I think it's a fun movie. I love movies about making movies. It might be my favorite genre. And so it had that going for it. I'm going to give this one an A. It's one that I could easily watch again and again. Not necessarily back to back, but from time to time and enjoy it. So this one's an awesome for me. What are your thoughts, Cheryl?
The first time I watched this movie, I thought it was delightful, and I had a great time because it just seemed like such a different take on the horror genre, and to the point where it's not even really a horror movie. It's more of a murder mystery, but I just thought it was cute and funny, and I liked the concept a lot. The second time I watched it, I found it a bit more annoying, and that's probably because the way we watch it the second time is stopping it every 10 seconds or so to write down what happened, and it just seemed to kind of be more of a grind the second time. However, I don't want that to bring down its grade for me because I still feel the same way I did the first time. That this movie's kind of fun. Robert H. Harris as Pete, we didn't mention that before, but I thought he was deliciously evil in this. For basically no reason. He probably could have got another job somewhere. I'm sure somebody would have snapped him up since not everyone's declared the horror cycle over, just that one pair of executives. But he just takes it to the 1000th degree and immediately jumps to, well, now I must kill. And that's kind of funny to me. I like movies that are more delightful than horrible. It was more of a campy, fun horror, and I enjoyed it. I definitely think that this is one that any fan of AIP has to have watched. This is the first time I've seen it. I should have seen it earlier because this is a fun movie. It's definitely an A for me too.
Well, the one thing I did learn from How to Make a Monster is you've got to have EU. And I think we have some EU and maybe more on our website, AIPpod.com.
It's bursting with EU.
Besides its fair share of EU, you can view posters, lobby cards, and trailers for the films we review. There's a list of films that we're looking for that we haven't been able to find that we hope to cover on future episodes of the podcast. And if you could look that over and see if you can help us dig up any of these films, you can also message us right there on our website and let us know where we can find them. Or you can just use that contact form to say hey and let us know what you think of the podcast. And there's also a link to our store where you can buy t-shirts, mugs, and other paraphernalia having to do with our podcast. And a purchase from the store will help us keep the podcast alive and the website going. And you can find all this and more at AIPpod.com.
All right, Jeff and I have our monsters built and they're ready to rock and roll for the next episode of the American International Podcast. I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And I'm Jeff Markin.
And we'll meet you at the drive-in.
Follow the American International Podcast on Instagram and Letterboxd at AIP_pod and on Facebook at facebook.com/American International Podcast.
The American International Podcast is produced and edited by Jeff Markin.
A man whose mind is distorted by hatred.
And Cheryl Lightfoot.
A girl hungry for too many things.
The American International Podcast is part of the Pop Culture Entertainment Network.